So imagine sitting across from an international grant committee. You've got the perfect project, a flawless budget, and like a decade of hands-on NGO
Right,
experience.
the perfect setup.
Exactly. You open your mouth to pitch the next phase of your initiative, but you use, one slightly passive verb. Or maybe you default to a really generic job title.
And just like that, it's over.
Yeah, suddenly that committee shifts from seeing you as this executive leader who drives strategy to, seeing you as a subordinate administrator who just follows directions. Today, we're looking at those microscopic language details that completely make or break professional authority.
Because language really dictates perception. For a professional operating at a high level, specifically someone balancing over 10 years in the non-governmental sector, 4 years in the fast-paced IT world, and a really dedicated commitment to public service, the wrong vocabulary doesn't just sound awkward.
It actively undermines your hard-earned credentials.
Right. Exactly. When you are steering complex, multi-year initiatives, precision in your English is just as critical as precision in your operational strategy.
Which means we need to move past basic communication and really focus on advanced executive level language. So we are tailoring this deep dive specifically for you, our listener.
We are going to examine the mechanics behind B2 and C1 English vocabulary, and then dissect the psychological weight of specific grammar rules that always trap advanced learners.
Yeah, and then we're going to pressure test everything in a high-stakes interview simulation. So let's just jump right in. What's the first barrier high-level professionals face when, translating their experience into English?
Honestly, it's underselling their governance.
Hmm.
When you build an organization or lead a major initiative, the title you use to describe yourself frames everything that follows. But many people just default to generic terms like, executive director.
Oh, yeah, I see that title everywhere. But in an international context, executive director often carries this layer of, structural ambiguity. It implies you are executing someone else's vision. You're the manager of the daily operations, but perhaps not the architect of the mission itself.
That is the exact distinction. If you hold the ultimate governance over an NGO, the precise, impactful term is head of the board.
Head of the board, I like that.
Yeah, when you introduce yourself as the head of the board, you immediately communicate that you are the final authority on compliance, strategic direction, institutional vision. You aren't just running the machine, you own the blueprint.
And I imagine that logic applies directly to the operational side too, right? Like, let's say you are driving the lifeblood of the organization. You're securing resources, managing donor relations, strategizing capital.
Yeah?
Calling yourself an operational manager actively damages your perceived value. It sounds like you are ordering office supplies and making sure the lights turn on.
It completely strips away the strategic nature of your work. The upgrade here is fundraising director.
Oh, that sounds much better.
It's active. It tells stakeholders that your primary function is the procurement and management of institutional resources. It elevates your role from, passive management to active growth.
We see a similar downgrade when professionals talk about past experience in education, don't we? Almost everyone has trained someone at some point.
Oh, absolutely.
But simply saying, I was a teacher, it creates this mental image of someone standing in front of a whiteboard delivering a pre-written lesson. So how do you frame that experience to reflect actual system building?
Well, you focus on the architecture of the education. If you design the curriculum, manage the scheduling, oversaw the learning outcomes, saying teaching positions severely shortchanges your impact.
So what's the alternative?
The C1 level upgrade is Educational Program Coordinator. This shows an employer or an investor that you didn't just deliver the material, you built the entire pedagogical system.
Educational program coordinator.
Yeah.
Yeah, the titles establish the hierarchy, but I feel like the verbs dictate the action. We really need to look at collocations, words that naturally bind together in English. Using the right collocations is kind of like using a specialized scalpel instead of a generic pocket knife, It shows expertise.
It's a great analogy.
Thanks. I've always noticed that inexperienced project managers will say things like, I did the project, or I made the initiative. It sounds incredibly isolated, almost like a lone wolf claiming all the credit.
And in international development or IT, nothing is built in a vacuum. The specific professional collocation you want is involved in.
Okay, involved in.
Yeah. For example, stating, I have been involved in the VMII project consortium focused on vocational education reform.
Ah, I see.
It implies a high degree of collaboration. It shows you understand how to integrate your expertise into a broader, complex consortium without needing to, claim singular ownership of a massive team effort.
That brings up a really fascinating operational mechanism, actually. How leaders describe resource management. We constantly hear about budget distribution. Everyone knows where the money is going because money is highly visible. But advanced professionals leverage a completely different metric when discussing strategy, don't they?
They do. They talk about time distribution.
Why does focusing on time distribution signal a higher level of executive thinking than just talking about the budget?
Because anybody can spend money. Budget distribution is a baseline requirement of management. Time, however, is a finite, invisible resource.
Right.
When a project fails, it is rarely because the money simply vanished. It fails because leadership misallocated human hours.
Yeah.
When you tell a board of directors we need to analyze our time distribution, you are signaling that you protect your team's schedule with the same ruthlessness that you protect the financial capital.
Oh, that's powerful. Let's carry that precision into specific action verbs. The English language uses very strict verbs depending on the legal or formal weight of an action. For instance, you don't just ask for a grant or a job.
Exactly, you apply for it. Asking is informal. It's just a simple favor. Applying for acknowledges that there is a formal bureaucratic barrier you're actively attempting to cross with prepared documentation.
And when you are initiating a new responsibility, say a secondary project outside your main scope, how do you frame that initiation?
You use the phrasal verb to take up.
To take up.
Yeah, this carries a specific sense of initiation and burden, like she has taken up a new volunteer role. It means you have consciously lifted a new responsibility onto your existing workload. Contrast that with to take part in, which simply means to participate alongside others.
Right, as in our team took part in the NeuroCats Youth Employment Project.
Exactly.
There's one more phrase with take that reveals a lot about how English conceptualizes information. I hear advanced learners constantly say they make notes during a meeting. But in English, you cannot make notes, you take notes. Why is that distinction so rigid?
It comes down to the underlying philosophy of the language. In many languages, you make a note because you are physically writing it into existence on the paper.
Sure, that makes logical sense.
But English treats the information in a meeting as an external resource that is already floating in the air. You aren't inventing the data, you are reaching out and capturing it. You are taking it from the collective conversation and securing it.
You're capturing an external resource. That makes perfect sense. So we have this sophisticated facade, the upgraded titles, the strategic verbs, but a beautiful facade collapses immediately if the load-bearing walls are weak. Which brings us to the structural foundation of the language, the grammar.
Grammar at the B2 and C1 level isn't just about avoiding simple errors. It is about ensuring your language doesn't accidentally signal passivity or hesitation. And the most critical load-bearing wall to examine is the to be rule, specifically how it separates active leadership from passive description.
Let's look at strong action verbs first. Words like rely on or depend on. When I am pitching a strategy, I want those words to drive the sentence forward. We rely on our partners. Success depends on teamwork.
Notice the mechanics there. Those action verbs operate like their own engines. They do not need assistance to move the sentence forward. The trap advanced learners fall into is adding the verb to be, so am, is, or are, in front of them.
Oh, like saying, I am rely on.
Yes, saying we rely on our partners essentially puts two engines in the same car, grinding the gears. It accidentally makes a strong, decisive statement sound confused and passive.
But adjectives function completely differently. If an action verb is the engine, an adjective is just the cargo. It has no power of its own.
Precisely. Adjectives describe a state of being, a feeling, or a condition. They absolutely require the verb to be to carry them forward. You cannot say, I interested in this project. The sentence has no momentum.
You have to attach the engine.
Right. I am interested in this project. Or, we are proud of the AURI Future Minds STEM Academy. You must have that structural support.
Okay, so action verbs drive themselves. Adjectives need a ride. Let's apply structural metaphors to linking words because this is where English seems needlessly frustrating to me. We have the words, although and despite. They both introduce a contrast or a roadblock. Why do we need two completely different grammatical rules for words that do the exact same job?
Because they handle different types of payloads. Think of a sentence like a train. Although is a connector that requires a full functioning train car behind it, meaning a full clause with a subject and a verb, an actor and an action.
Give me an example of that payload.
Although the deadline was tight, Deadline is the subject, is the verb. It is a complete thought trailing behind the word all
So
there.
how does despite operate?
Despite, or its equivalent in spite of, is a flatbed train car. It cannot carry an engine. It can only carry a noun or a gerund, which is an ing word, acting as a noun. You cannot put a verb immediately after it.
Meaning, I cannot say, despite the deadline was tight, the verb was breaks the rule.
Exactly. You have to strip away the verb entirely and just load the noun phrase onto the flatbed. Despite the tight deadline, we submitted the proposal.
Okay, but what if a professional is speaking in a high-pressure environment, like an interview, and they start a sentence with despite, but halfway through they realize they really need to use a full sentence to explain the context? Is there a structural loophole?
Actually, there is a very specific linguistic shield you can deploy by adding the phrase, the fact that immediately after despite, you convert the entire following sentence into a giant noun clause.
Oh, so instead of crashing the train, I could say, despite the fact that the deadline was tight, we submitted the proposal.
Yes. The fact becomes the noun sitting on the flatbed, and the rest of the sentence is just describing that fact. It is a vital recovery tactic during high-level public speaking.
Let's shift from structural rules to strategic logic, specifically how English forces you to declare whether you are being proactive or reactive using in case versus if.
This is a major distinction for anyone involved in risk management. In case he requires you to take action in advance, it is a precaution built into your strategy before a problem ever occurs.
Like health insurance. If I say I'm buying insurance in case I get sick, the timeline is clear. I am acting now, while I am perfectly healthy, to build a wall against a future possibility.
But if everyone introduces a condition after the fact, it dictates a reaction.
So if I say I'm going to buy insurance if I get sick, my strategy is fundamentally broken. I mean, by the time the condition is met, by the time I am sick, the opportunity to protect myself has already passed.
Exactly. And when you are leading an NGO, stakeholders want to hear in-case logic. You build reserve funds in case a grant falls through. If you tell a board that you will figure out fundraising if the grant falls through, you are signaling a dangerous reactive management style.
Speaking of stakeholders, let's talk about how to project certainty into the future. When an investor or a board member asks about a timeline, they don't want vague hopes. They want guarantees. How do the future perfect and future continuous tenses manipulate psychological certainty?
Well, future perfect forces the listener to mentally stand at a future deadline and look backward at a completed result. The mechanical clues are the word by, and the structure will have plus the third form of the verb.
By next summer, we will have launched the STEM Academy.
Exactly. You aren't saying you will be working on it. You are forcing the investor to visualize the academy as an already finished product sitting in next summer. It projects absolute authority and certainty.
Whereas future continuous keeps the listener in the messy middle of the process.
Yes. The triggers are phrases like at this time tomorrow or the word still. It utilizes will be plus an ing verb. At this time next year, I will be working with the AURI team in Ireland. It signals ongoing, uninterrupted momentum rather than finality.
You know, theory is crucial, but it only matters if it holds up under pressure. To demonstrate how this vocabulary and these structural rules operate in the real world, we are going to switch dynamics right now and run an interview simulation.
I will step into the role of the candidate. And I won't be playing just anyone. I'm going to represent you, the listener, utilizing your exact professional background to show how these tools elevate your specific experience.
And I will adopt the role of a formal, somewhat skeptical hiring manager. Listeners, pay close attention to how the language handles defensive posture, how the verbs establish an executive presence, and how the grammar operates quietly in the background to reinforce competence. So let's begin.
Ready when you are.
Please have a seat. Looking over your CV, your background is certainly extensive, but it is also highly fragmented. You have a decade in the NGO sector, 4 years in the IT world, and a history of public service. Could you walk me through your current primary roles and how you manage this level of overlap?
Thank you for the opportunity to clarify my operational focus. I have 10 years of comprehensive experience dedicated to the NGO sphere, and currently I serve as the head of the board at NGO ZOD.
I see.
While my background in the IT sector spans 4 years, I have strategically integrated that technical expertise into my work by operating as a business consultant and trainer under a sole proprietorship since 2018. Rather than being fragmented, these roles cross-pollinate to improve organizational efficiency.
Cross-pollination is a strong claim. Give me a concrete example. Can you detail a recent project where you've had to build a framework from the ground up?
Certainly. I recently took up a volunteer role as the head of grants and fundraising for the Association of Ukrainians in Ireland, or AORI. We are currently designing the programmatic framework for the AOI Future Minds STEM Academy. I am directly involved in structuring the pedagogical approach, ensuring it aligns with our broader funding objectives.
Managing a new STEM Academy framework while leading NGO's ZHOD requires significant internal coordination. How do you guarantee your team maintains focus during periods of transition or restructuring?
My leadership philosophy prioritizes strict time distribution alongside traditional budget distribution. For instance, in preparation for our planned team restructuring for the second half of 2026, we updated specific team responsibilities. Despite the fact that transitions inherently cause friction, our time distribution strategy ensures that every team member focuses on learning new skills to directly improve their career trajectory, keeping engagement high.
I see you also maintain a role in local governance. Does public service actively inform your NGO strategy, or is it a separate endeavor?
They are deeply connected. I have served as a deputy of the Mariupol District Council and secretary of the Committee on Socioeconomic Development since 2020. Operating within public service has taught me how to depend on effective, cross-functional teamwork and rely on community feedback to drive actionable policy. That direct community engagement is the foundation of how I structure our NGO initiatives.
All right, and we can drop the simulation there. Let's analyze what just happened.
Phew, okay. The primary goal under that kind of pressure is to maintain an active, unyielding executive presence, even when the interviewer suggests your experience is fragmented.
Yeah, the vocabulary acted as an immediate shield there. You didn't just manage an NGO, you established ultimate authority by stating you serve as the head of the board at NGO ZOSHODI and the head of grants and fundraising for AURI. Those titles instantly neutralize the skepticism about your focus.
And notice the mechanics of the grammar when discussing public service. I stated that public service taught me to depend on effective teamwork and rely on community feedback. I completely avoided the verb to be. It wasn't passive description, it was a demonstration of action-oriented policymaking.
You also effectively deployed the involved in collocation to show strategic integration with the STEM Academy, and you perfectly executed the linking word loophole under pressure, despite the fact that transitions inherently cause friction. It allowed you to acknowledge a complex reality without breaking the structural rules of the language.
This is how a professional utilizes English, not just to recount their history, but to actively reinforce their competence in real time. The language does half the heavy lifting for you.
Stepping back from the intensity of the grammar mechanics and that high-stakes simulation, we have to objectively acknowledge the sheer volume of output required to sustain the specific career trajectory.
The structural load is immense, balancing over a decade of NGO governance, private sector IT consulting, designing the framework for the AURI Future Minds STEM Academy, and serving as a deputy in the Mariupol District Council requires an extraordinary level of discipline.
And on top of that daily operational output, to simultaneously push yourself to master the deepest, most microscopic nuances of B2 and C1 English, it really demonstrates a relentless commitment to professional growth.
It is a phenomenal work ethic. But it is vital to remember that cognitive acquisition, especially at this advanced tier where you are fighting for millimeters of linguistic precision, is a marathon, not a sprint. The brain cannot constantly run at maximum capacity.
Because success depends on daily effort, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And the structural mechanics of that final tag question were flawlessly executed, by the way.
I had to slip one last cheeky grammar nod in there. But the underlying point is genuine. The efforts compound over time. Keep refining those relative clauses. Stay vigilant about active verbs versus state of being adjectives. And above all, recognize when it is time to step away from the work.
Rest is when the brain actually consolidates complex information. If you don't step away, the grammar rules and the vocabulary upgrades will just blur together.
So close the laptop, step away from the strategic planning for a few hours, turn on some ballroom dancing music, maybe a cha-cha or a samba to physically reset, or get outside, fire up the grill, and prep some meat to make a massive, perfect pot of pilaf for the weekend. You have entirely earned the right to unplug.
Keep pushing the boundaries with NGO, ZHOD, and the AURI Future Minds project. You have the tools, and you absolutely have this under control.
But before you go enjoy that pilaf, there is one final, larger concept to mull over regarding everything we've discussed today.
Yeah, when we study advanced language, we usually assume the language is just a tool to help us articulate our pre-existing thoughts. But considering the intense structural rules of English, how it forces you to proactively calculate in case versus if, or how it makes you visualize completed future deadlines, Does the strict grammar of a foreign language actually begin to restructure the way you approach strategic planning in your native thinking?
Does learning to build a flawless English sentence fundamentally rewire how you build an organizational framework from the ground up? It's something to chew on while you rest. Until next time, keep analyzing the details and keep diving deep.